So in this video, I'm going to go over the basic fundamentals of hunting right here in Washington State. Got a lot of questions and requests from people asking me to do this video, and I'm going to be honest, I'm kind of late on this video, but that's just because I haven't had time to sit down and make this video. But here we are, better late than never. So in this video, I'm going to cover the basic stuff, like all the little things that you need to know to just get your foot on the ground so that you can just start getting on your hunting journey. So the first thing that you have to do, any new hunter has to do, is you have to take and pass this course called the Hunter Education Course. What this Hunter Education Course is it's basically a class that teaches you the basics of hunting, whether it's hunting regulations, conservation, ethics, like firearm safety and all that stuff. The Hunter Education Course will lay out the basics of everything you need to know about hunting. If I'm not mistaken, the Hunter Education Course is available in two places. You can either take it online on your desktop, or you can sign up for in-person classes where there will actually be an instructor that teaches you just like, a school classroom. So that's the first thing you have to do as a new hunter is you have to pass the Hunter Education Course. Now, I should have said this in the first place, but I'll say it here because I forgot. So the Hunter Education Course is only required for you if you were born after January 1st, 1972. If you were born December 31st, 1971 and earlier, you do not have to take the Hunter Education Course. Once you pass that course, they will give you a little certificate saying that you successfully passed the course. And that certificate right there is what will validate you to buy your hunting licenses and whatnot. If you don't have that, well, you can't buy a hunting license. Now, on another note, similar to the Hunter Education Course, there's this program called the Hunter Education Deferral Program. Take it like this. The Hunter Education Course itself, the legitimate course, is like your driver's license. The deferral program is like your driver's permit. So if you pass the Hunter Education Course, you can go hunting on your own terms. You are independent, just like your driver's license, right? If you have your driver's license, you can go driving on your own terms. You don't have to have anybody else in the car with you. Now with the deferral program, it's like a driver's permit, right? With the driver's permit, if you have a permit, you need a licensed driver in the car with you at all times. With the deferral program, you need a licensed hunter to be mentoring you at all times on your hunts. So with the deferral program, you can't go hunting by yourself, and a lot of times you can't do really anything independently. So that's the simplest way I can differentiate the difference between a deferral program and the Hunter Education Course itself. So the deferral program is a good choice if you have a mentor, but take it from here, you won't escape the Hunter Education Course. So my advice is just to take the Hunter Education Course and be done with it. So now that you have passed your Hunter Education Course, now we can start looking into the juicy stuff of the hunting world, right? So before we even dive into deer hunts, elk hunts, bear hunts, whatever, I just want to talk about two things, and those two things are general hunts versus special hunts. So here in Washington, there are two types of hunt that occurs. You have your general hunts and your special hunts. Now, before we get into the difference between the two, I just want to throw out some synonyms of the two. That way, when somebody brings up a different name, you know what they're referring to, right? So with general hunts, it's often referred to as general tags or over-the-counter tags, or OTC for short. Special hunts are often referred to as special permits, special draw tags, etc. So the difference between a general tag and a special tag is pretty simple. General hunts or general tags are the tags that you can simply go to a vendor, tell them, hey, I want to buy this tag. You pay them, they print you your tag, you are on your way to go hunting. That's as simple as it gets. There's no catches. There's nothing complicated with them. It's simply just go to the store, buy it like you would buy any type of merchandise, and you're ready to go. That is a general hunt. That is a general tag. And for the vast majority of you, if not all of you, those are the hunts that you will partake in the most. Special hunts, on the other hand, it requires a little bit more complicated process. So special hunts are these specific hunts that the state allocates to the hunting public. And these hunts have a very limited number of tags, right? So for example, let's say Unit A, right? Fish and Game allocates 20 deer tags for hunters to hunt in Unit A. So that means there's only 20 tags available for 20 hunters. And since this is like a lottery, let's say there are 100 people applying for that tag in Unit A for that deer tag. Since there are 100 people applying for it and there are only 20 deer tags available, that means that 20 of those 100 people will get the tag, but the other 80 people are out of luck and they will not be able to get a tag, and so simply they won't be able to go on that hunt for that year. So in a nutshell, that's literally the difference right there. General tags, you can just go to the store and you can just buy it. With the special hunts, it's like a lottery, right? You might get to hunt, you might not get to hunt. It really just depends on your luck. So again, I'm going with the assumption that a lot of you are just wanting to get your foot into hunting. So in this video, we won't talk about special hunts. We're just going to focus on the general hunts. But a couple years ago, I did upload a video explaining the whole process of how to apply for special hunts and how to understand special hunts. So if you go into the link of the description, there will actually be a link to that video. So if you want to learn more about special applications and whatnot, you can just learn from that video. But for this video, we're talking about beginner hunters and we're talking about the most easy way to get into hunting, which in this case would be general hunts. Again, the tags that you can just go to a vendor and just buy your tag. So with that being said, we're throwing special hunts off the table. We're just going to focus on general hunts. So one last thing before we move on to the next topic, both residents and non-residents undergo the same exact procedure, right? So everything I'm telling you guys here are the same exact thing whether or not you live in Washington. Residents and non-residents, you undergo the same process. The only difference between resident and non-resident is that residents pay a much lower fee for their tags, like deer and elk tags, and then non-residents, they just pay a much more hefty fee to get their licenses. So that's really the only difference between a resident versus a non-resident when it comes to Washington's tag system. Other than that, everything else is pretty much the same. So again, in this video, we're not talking about special hunts, we're only talking about general hunts. And in Washington, there's a lot of general hunts out there, right? You got like turkey, deer, elk, bear, cougar, waterfowl, and whatnot. But in this video, I'm just gonna cover big game. So I'm not gonna cover turkey, I'm not gonna cover grouse, duck, waterfowl, any of that stuff. I'm just gonna cover big game. And so in the state of Washington, there are 4 big game animals that you can hunt year after year under a general hunt. Those 4 animals are deer, elk, black bear, and cougar. Now, if you want to be a lot more specific, you can break down deer and elk into all the subspecies. For example, deer, you have black-tailed deer, mule deer, and whitetail. Elk, you got Roosevelt elk and Rocky Mountain elk. But to keep things simple, we're just going to clump all 3 species of deer into one, and we're just going to call them deer. And same with elk, we're going to clump both species of elk into one, and we're just going to call it elk. It's just going to make your life a lot easier, because in a moment that I'll get to here, you will notice it doesn't really matter in terms of what species it is. So we're just going to call it deer and elk. So now let's get into the process of actually buying your tags. Now you can do this either online, or you can go into a brick and mortar store and go to an actual licensed vendor and buy it there instead. But to make things simple, because I'm assuming, again, this is your first time, I'd encourage you to go in store instead. So let's say you go into the store, there's the licensed vendor. You show them your hunter education certificate because you passed the course, and you tell them, hey, I want to buy some hunting license. The first thing we're going to talk about is the elk license, because it's the more complicated one, right? So in the state of Washington, Washington is divided into 2 halves. You have Western Washington and you have Eastern Washington. Now, how Fish and Game has divided the state is they divided west from east by game management units, or GMUs for short, or units for short. So for example, you have GMU 124, GMU 166, GMU 326. So the easiest way to know whether you are looking at a Western unit or a Eastern unit is by the first number of the 3-digit unit. Okay, so all units are 3 digits. If the first number of that unit is a 1, a 2, or a 3, that is an Eastern Washington unit. If the first number of that unit starts with a 4, a 5, or a 6, you are looking at Western Washington units. That is the easiest way to differentiate whether you are looking at an Eastern Washington unit or a Western Washington unit. So again, 1, 2, 3 for the first number is Eastern. 4, 5, 6 for the first number is Western. So you might ask, well, what's the significance between Western and Eastern? Well, specifically for your elk tag only, when you buy your elk tag, you have to choose whether you want to hunt elk in Western Washington or Eastern Washington. So if you tell the license vendor, hey, I want to buy an elk tag for Eastern Washington, your elk tag for that season is only valid for the eastern half of the state. That means you can only hunt elk in Eastern Washington. If you buy an Eastern Washington tag, elk tag, you cannot go and hunt Western Washington for elk. So vice versa, if you buy a Western Washington elk tag, you cannot go and hunt Eastern Washington for elk for that season. That is the significance of Western versus Eastern Washington. And again, this is exclusive to elk hunting and elk licenses. So to get back on track, so when you go to the license vendor and you tell them you want to buy an elk tag, that's the first thing that they're going to ask you is, do you want to hunt elk in Western Washington or do you want to hunt elk in Eastern Washington? After you have made your choice of East or West, the next thing that they will ask you is what weapon do you want to hunt elk with? And in Washington, there's 3 seasons. You have your archery elk season, you have your muzzleloader elk season, and you have your rifle elk season. That choice is completely on you depending on what you want to hunt elk with. So I'm going to leave it to you. Now, I'm just assuming here. So a lot of people, when they first start out, they start out rifle hunting, right? So the vast majority of you are going to be hunting elk with a rifle this year. So that's basically the process of buying your elk tag in Washington. You just clarify east or west side, and you just clarify which type of weapon you want to hunt elk. Once you have clarified those 2 questions, they print out your elk license, you're good to go. Now we're going to move on to the deer tag, which is a little less complicated than elk, but more complicated than bear and cougar. With deer, the only question you have to answer for your deer tag is what type of weapon you want to hunt deer. You either choose archery for deer, muzzleloader for deer, or rifle for deer. That's the only question you have to answer for deer. Unlike elk, not only did you have to answer archery, muzzleloader, or rifle, but you also had to specify which side of Washington you wanted to hunt. So that's a slight difference between a deer tag and an elk tag. Now the last 2 is your cougar tag and your black bear tag. Unlike deer and elk, with a black bear tag and a cougar tag, you do not have to specify which side of the state, nor do you have to specify what type of weapon you want to hunt bear and cougar with. You simply just go up and just say, hey, I want to buy a bear tag. They print you the bear tag, you're good to go. That's as simple as it gets. So those are the differences between an elk tag, a deer tag, and a black bear and a cougar tag when it comes to purchasing your tag. So if you understand that process and the differences between buying an elk tag versus a deer tag versus a black bear / cougar tag, then buying a license is a complete breeze. So the next question people are going to ask me is, okay, so what species of deer is my deer tag good for? The cool thing about your deer tag, your general deer tag, is it's actually good for all 3 species in Washington, right? Your deer tag, your general deer tag, can be used to notch a black-tailed deer, a mule deer, or a white-tailed deer. It really just depends on what you want to hunt, okay? So again, if you look at the deer tag, it doesn't specify black-tailed deer, mule deer, or white-tailed deer. It just says deer tag. The tag itself is not where you have to be worried about. It's the regulation and season that you have to worry about, which we will get to later in this video. But again, if you understand that, buying licenses is a breeze. So I'm assuming that the majority of you watching this video, you're planning on your first hunt, in which it's going to be with a rifle. So in this video, I'm not going to talk about bows or muzzleloaders or handguns or shotguns. We're just going to talk about rifles, bolt action rifles. And so in the state of Washington, there is a regulation regarding the smallest caliber that you can use to hunt big game. In this case, deer, elk, black bear, and mountain lion, right? So I'm going to put cougar here because it's kind of its own little thing. And then I'm going to put deer, elk, and black bear on this side. So the minimum cartridge that you can use for elk, deer, and black bear is a 243 Winchester or a 6mm Creedmoor. That is the smallest cartridge that you can legally use to hunt those 3 species. On the other hand, for cougar or mountain lion, the smallest caliber to hunt cougar is actually a 22 caliber center fire rifle. For example, it would be like a 22-250 or a 223 Remington. Now it begs the question, what type of caliber or cartridge should I buy? And honestly, that is completely up to you, but I will give you 4 cartridges that I think are perfect for those 4 big game animals. The first is a 30-06 Springfield. The second is a 308 Winchester. The third is a 270 Winchester. And the fourth is a 7mm 08 Remington. Those 4 cartridges will easily handle all 4 big game: mountain lion, black bear, elk, and deer. It is up to you to get proficient with your rifle and shoot it accurately and know the shot placement of where that bullet needs to go in the animal to lethally put it down. So that's going to do it for this portion of this video. Now I'm going to switch you guys over to my desktop, and we're going to cover some more specific things regarding like regulations and e-scouting and learning how to choose what part of Washington you want to hunt, and just some e-scouting tips that you might find useful. So with that being said, let's hop over. Every single one of you can find this online, just searching like Washington hunting regulations or something along those lines, and you should be able to find a PDF of the entire 2021 regulation pamphlet. So we're just gonna scroll down until we get to the table of contents, which is right here. And so the table of contents literally will have all the big topics that you need to go and read when you are figuring out how to hunt Washington, right? For example, it's broken up into topics. So like in this first topic, it's just general information, right? Age requirements, baiting for elk and deer, definitions of certain words and whatnot in there, the Department of Fish and Wildlife offices, hunting equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And then you go down here where it says black bear. This will teach you guys the specific regulations regarding black bear. And then down here, same with cougar, specific regulations regarding cougar. And then we go to deer, specific regulations regarding deer, elk, goat, moose, bighorn sheep, turkey, etc. So there you go. The table of contents literally lists everything you need to know to hunt Washington. In this video, to save time, I'm not going to go through every single one of these subtopics because that's just going to take way too much time. And again, every single one of you has access to this pamphlet, so you can go read whatever I don't cover in this video. But on that note, even if I cover a certain topic in this video, I encourage you to still go and read it on your own too. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the deer section right here, and we're just going to read here. So archery general, this is for the archery season for deer, is on page 22. Again, we're only covering rifle, so we're not going to go to that page. Deer special permits, we're not doing special permits in this video. General information and definitions, page 20. Modern firearm general, 21. Muzzleloader general, 23. Again, we are only covering rifle season for deer, elk, and so on. So in this case, we're just going to scroll down to page 20 and 21, and that should lead us to where we want to be. So we're going to go down. All right, so here we are. For this specific video, we're going to cover page 20 and page 21. So page 20 is basically just listing the general information about deer in Washington state. 21 is going to talk about the regulations and seasons regarding hunting deer in Washington. But to put you guys on par with people who've hunted before, we're going to go through the general information regarding deer, right? So on this page right here, it literally tells you what you have to do to buy a deer tag in Washington. In fact, I covered this just a moment ago, right? Step 1, purchase a big game hunting license with deer as a species. Step 2, choose the appropriate deer transport tag for one of the following hunting methods: modern firearm, muzzleloader, or archery. Again, I covered that. And then third, it talks about the differences of the season dates depending on your hunting method, right? So if you chose an archery tag, you're probably hunting in September. If you chose a rifle tag, you're hunting in late October. If you chose a muzzleloader, you're probably hunting in early October. And then fourth, this is talking about special permit hunts, which we're not doing that. And then step 5 is after the entire season is over, right? After hunting season is over, whether or not you killed a deer, you have to report your hunting activity online, and they give you the website here, or you can call their phone number. This is required for all species of animals, it doesn't matter if it's a deer, elk, mountain lion, or bear, you have to do what is called hunter reporting. So you have to report whether or not you were successful killing or harvesting a deer, elk, black bear, or a cougar. The next thing is just definitions, right? You got like 3-point minimum, you got antler points. What is an antler point? What is an antlerless deer? What is any buck mean? What is a black-tailed deer? What's a mule deer? What's a white-tailed deer, etc. These are good to know because some of these definitions are very specific to game management units and sometimes specific species. We'll flip back and forth between these definitions, but down here on the last part of page 20, it shows you a little chart of the different subspecies of deer in Washington. In Western Washington, you have Columbian white-tailed deer and black-tailed deer. And if you read down here, Columbian white-tailed deer found in Southwest Washington are a protected species and are not legal to hunt. That means if you see a white-tailed deer or a Columbian white-tailed deer in Southwest Washington, you can't shoot it. So in this diagram right here, it kind of points out the differences between a Columbian white-tailed deer and a black-tailed deer. So you can go in and just study this diagram by yourself. On the flip side, if you go to the right side, this is the difference between white-tailed deer and mule deer. The reason why this is split is because white-tailed deer and mule deer are found in Eastern Washington, while black-tailed deer and Columbian white-tailed deer are found in Western Washington. In Western Washington, you're going to have to differentiate the difference between black-tailed deer and Columbian white-tailed deer. And then in Eastern Washington, sometimes you have to differentiate the difference between a white-tailed deer and a mule deer. That's why they're split like this. Again, right here, you can find and look at the differences between a white-tailed deer and mule deer. I'm just going to leave that up to you. Now we move on to the actual regulations of deer hunting in Washington. Again, we are only covering modern firearm general deer season, which another word for modern firearm is just rifle season. This little chart right here has the dates of when you can hunt certain species in certain units. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to teach you guys how to read this chart right here. There's 4 different categories. So up here, if you go to the very top, you have hunt season, 2021 dates, game management units or GMUs, and then last is you have legal deer. So the hunt season is basically just a name for the hunt or what species you're going to go after, right? So like for the first one, you can see this is your high buck hunt. If you just keep going, here you see it says general season. These are all the regulations for black-tailed deer in this row right here. And then right here, you have all the regulations regarding white-tailed deer. And then last, you have all the regulations regarding mule deer. And then if you go further down, you have a late general season for both black-tailed deer and white-tailed deer. And so you can see here. If you're like me, a general adult resident, you can do the high buck hunt, the black-tailed deer hunt, white-tailed deer hunt, mule deer hunt under the general season right here. And you can also do the late general season, okay? The last 2 rows down here that says Hunter 65 and over and disabled general seasons, along with youth general seasons, are not valid for us, okay? Because as the name implies, this hunt right here is only valid for hunters who are 65 and over and are qualified disabled hunters and are hunters who are considered youth. So in this video, we're just going to talk about the general season and the late general season, but I'm just going to give you guys one example and we'll start from there. But what did I just do? Anyway, here's how you read this chart, okay? So if you come up here to the very top of this chart, you can see it says hunt season, 2021 dates, game management units or GMUs for short, and then last you have legal deer. So again, the high buck hunt, all the general seasons and late general seasons are valid for any resident or non-resident general deer hunter. How you dissect this is the same for essentially all these categories, but I'm just going to use white-tailed deer as an example. So you're going to read this from left to right, just like this with what I have highlighted, right? So for white-tailed deer, specifically for the species white-tailed deer, these are the season dates that you can hunt in 2021. So you can see there's 2 different dates here. So you have to make sure that you're reading the same row here. From October 16th through the 29th of 2021, you can legally hunt white-tailed deer in units 101, 105, 108, 111, 113, 117, 121, and 124. Okay. And then the legal deer for whitetail is any buck. So what that means is if we just look at the highlighted row from October 16th through the 29th, in these stated units, you are allowed to shoot any whitetail buck because that's what is stated under the legal deer category, right? It's any buck for whitetail, any whitetail buck. And I want to clarify, even though it says any buck, remember, we are looking under the whitetail section. So although it says any buck, it's referring to any whitetail buck. So now you might be like, okay, what is any buck? Well, that's what page 20 is for. So let's scroll back up. So right here, the definition for any buck: any deer with visible antlers may be taken. Fawns, illegal. So what that means is if we go back down here, right? So we're looking at this example right here. In units 101, 105, 108, 111, 113, 117, 121, and 124, if you see a whitetail buck and you can see the visible antler, it doesn't matter if it's a big antler or a small antler. If you can visibly see that antler, you are legally allowed to shoot that deer. If you cannot see a visible antler on that deer's head, then that means it is not considered any buck, so you cannot shoot that deer. So that is one example of how to read this, but let's do another example to hopefully clarify some of the questions you might still have. So let's jump down to mule deer. So whitetail deer, you can see here, it was split into two different rows because essentially there's two different general seasons for whitetail deer. But for mule deer, there's only one, right? So what that means is if you just look at all this right here, it basically is one single season. So for mule deer, the 2021 general deer season for mule deer occurs from October 16th through the 26th, and it is valid for all these stated units right here, 101 through 145, 149, so on. You go to the last column, the legal deer, unlike the whitetail deer that we just talked about where the legal deer was any buck, for mule deer, the legal deer is 3-point minimum. You might be like, okay, what is considered 3-point minimum? Again, we're going to go back to page 20 and we're going to look at the definitions. The first definition under this section right here is literally 3-point minimum. So what is the definition of a 3-point minimum deer? The definition is a legal deer taken in these GMUs must have at least 3 antler points on one side. The next question that you have to ask is, okay, well, what is considered an antler point? So if we go to the next definition, it's literally right here, antler points. To qualify as a point on a deer, an antler point must be at least 1 inch long, measured on the longest side. So they give us a reference here. See diagram on page 39. So let's scroll down to page 39. So here we are on page 39 as the reference guided us to. And this basically shows you the diagram of what is considered a 3-point. And so this right here is the diagram of a mule deer. And so if you look on his right side of his antler, you can see he has 3 points, right? On his left side, he only has 2. It's only a forky. So this deer is what we would call a 2x3. And so again, the definition was that a 3-point minimum deer just needs one side of his antlers to have 3 points, right? So this guy, even though he only has 2 points on his left side, his right antler has 3 points. So this is a legal deer for you to shoot. On the flip side, this guy right here to the right, you can see both sides of his antlers have 3 points. So again, one side of his antler already has 3 points. So this is also a legal deer. And this little diagram to the right shows you how you would physically measure the length of a specific point. And so you measure from the long side. So here, if you measure like this, that's 1 inch. So again, the definition, if we go back up, to qualify as a point on a deer, an antler point must be at least 1 inch long, measure from the longest side. So to conclude on this, if you are hunting mule deer in these units during the general season, which is October 16th through the 26th, you have to make sure that the deer you are going to shoot qualifies as a 3-point minimum deer. Again, the definitions that we just went through is one side of that buck's antler must have at least 3 points, and all those points must be at least 1 inch long. So with those two examples, you can pretty much go through the rest of these regulations and basically be able to dissect it yourself and be able to understand what they're referring to. So that's really all there is to it. You have to pay attention to what species that they are referring to. You have to understand what season dates are open. You have to understand what units are open for that specific hunt. And you have to understand what deer you are allowed to shoot in those units. So if you can understand that, you're pretty solid in terms of understanding how the regulation chart works in Washington. Now, I'm going to take it one step further, and hopefully this will give you an even better idea of how it works. So let's take mule deer. Let's say you want to go mule deer hunting during the general rifle season, during October 16th through the 26th. And let's say you chose Unit 101, just because Unit 101 is right here, right? Because that's one of the units that are open for mule deer hunting during the general rifle season. So what we're going to do is we're going to exit out of this, and we're going to go to a map called onxmaps.com. So if you don't know what OnX Maps is, it's basically a hunting e-scouting tool that will show you public/private land boundaries. So it will show you where you can hunt versus where you cannot hunt. It'll also show you the game management units and just a bunch of other stuff that just makes e-scouting for hunting a breeze. So when you first buy it, this is probably what you're gonna see when you're looking at Washington, just a map of Washington, right? So if you go to the top left corner, it's gonna have a section that says map layers. You're gonna click on map layers, and it's gonna show up into two sections. It's gonna say my layers and layer library. So we're gonna click layer library, and when you click layer library, it's gonna literally list all 50 states of the United States. But since we're wanting to learn about Washington, we're gonna scroll all the way down to Washington. We're gonna click this plus sign. And when you click it, it's gonna show you a bunch of different layers. Like right here, you can see private lands, government lands, Washington hunt units, possible access units, and stuff like that. If you press the plus sign, then that map, that layer will load onto the map itself. For this example right here, I'm just gonna talk about the units. So we're gonna go to the hunt units tab, and we're just gonna press the plus sign. So once you press the plus sign, it's gonna now show you all the units of Washington. Now you can see there's all these green lines, and these are the boundaries of the GMUs. So if we go back up here to my layers, you can see in Washington, we have added the hunt units onto there. If I turn it off, which I just press on this, you can see all the green outlines are gone. But if I turn it on, boom, there's all the game management units. Makes it super easy on you. So again, our example was that we were gonna go mule deer hunting in GMU 101 from October 16th through the 26th. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go find GMU 101, which GMU 101 is right up here. So you can see when you scroll in, all the game management unit numbers pop out. So you can see here's unit 101, 105, 108, 209, 215, 233, etc. But for this particular hunt, we're just gonna zoom into 101. Right in GMU 101, right? This entire unit right here that's outlined by this green marker. If we go back and we read the regulations, the regulation is you have to shoot a 3-point minimum deer. That means in unit 101, if you are hunting mule deer in this unit and you come across a mule deer buck, you have to make sure that that mule deer buck has 3 points on one side of his antlers, okay? That is literally it right there. So again, we're hunting mule deer October 16th through the 26th in GMU 101. GMU 101, the legal deer is a 3-point minimum deer. That means for mule deer in 101, you are hunting a 3-point minimum deer. On the flip side, if you go to whitetail, look, there's GMU 101 again, but what's the legal deer for whitetail deer? Any buck, okay? So that means that if you come here to whitetail hunt in GMU 101 during the general season, you can shoot any whitetail buck. But for mule deer, you have to shoot a 3-point minimum mule deer buck. So that's the difference in terms of learning how to read this regulation chart that Fish and Game has divided for us. So my point is, when you are doing your research and you're gonna go hunt, you have to be very precise and specific as to where you wanna go hunt, or at least what unit you want to go hunt. But alongside with that, you have to know the specific regulations regarding a specific species of animal in that particular unit. So again, the example I gave you was a mule deer versus a white-tailed deer. You're hunting the same exact unit, but the white-tailed deer regulation is you're just hunting any buck, and mule deer, you're hunting a 3-point minimum deer. And also, if you look at the season dates, white-tailed deer goes from the 16th of October through the 29th. The mule deer hunt goes from the 16th through the 26th. So the point is, when you're doing your research, be very specific, because these small changes right here can put you in a lot of trouble if you're not careful, right? Somebody who doesn't take their time really looking at this might just assume that the mule deer hunt also goes to the 29th, which is not true. The mule deer hunt for GMU 101 ends on the 26th, while the white-tailed deer hunt goes through the 29th. So if you shoot like a mule deer on the 28th of October, you basically broke the rule because you shot a mule deer out of season, which is not good. So hopefully with this quick demonstration, it gives you an understanding of how you can dissect the general deer seasons and how you can also implement it into your e-scouting research. If you understand that, then for elk, it's basically the same exact concept. Elk and deer, they're basically identical. Just make sure you know what species they're talking about, what dates are open for certain units, and what the legal animal for that unit or that hunt is. If you understand that, then the elk and deer, you're basically ready to go. So that right there covers how the deer regulations and the elk chart regulations work. Deer and elk, they're pretty much identical. Now when we go to like bear and cougar, they're slightly different, but they're a little bit less complicated. So we're going to move on to fall bear. So this is page 68 of the 2021 hunting pamphlet. So right here, again, we are talking about general season. So the general season for bear, again, is during the fall. So right here, if you go to the top left corner, you can see fall black bear general season dates is from August 1st through November 15th. So unlike deer and elk, where they have a lot of specific charts and units, with bear, it's a lot more universal. So August 1st through November 15th is essentially statewide. So if you look at the Washington map, basically the entire state, with a few exceptions that I'll get to here, are open for fall bear during August 1st through November 15th. So we go to the next one. There's some area restrictions. GMUs 157, 490, and 522 are closed to fall bear hunting. There's another special regulation right here. A special deer permit is required to hunt bear in GMU 485. So those are the caveats when it comes to the fall general black bear season in Washington. Besides those specific units here, the rest of the state is essentially open for black bear hunting. This is just talking about some of the things that you need to go black bear hunting. And the first one is obviously your license. And then the next one that talks about is your second black bear tag, because in Washington, you can actually shoot up to 2 black bear in the fall season. So that goes to my point here. Bag limit, 2 black bear during the license year. Then hunting method, it's going to talk about weapons. And I briefly touched on that. So we're going to move on here. And then if we go to the right, these are just some things that come with a fall bear hunt. So the first one is talking about female or sows that are accompanied by cubs. So if we just read this, it literally explains it. During the fall, females may be accompanied by cubs weighing 30 to 50 pounds, which tend to lag behind. So please observe and be patient before shooting. If you guys watched any of my bear hunting videos, there's a reason why I glass my bears for a good amount of time before I just make my move on them, because a lot of times I'm looking for cubs, essentially. So the point here, be patient when you're hunting bears, because again, you want to make sure that the sow does not have any cubs. The next thing is a bear identification test. So right here, it is a requirement for any Washington hunter if you are bear hunting in specific units. So if we just read this, it literally says this: hunters that choose to hunt in GMUs located in grizzly bear recovery areas identified by the department must successfully complete the annual WDFW online bear identification test. They must score 80% or higher and carry proof that they have passed the WDFW test or an equivalent test from another state. The GMUs that require a bear identification test are 101, 105, 108, 111, 113, 117, 203, 204, 209, 215, 418, and 426. So if you're hunting bear in any of those listed units, you must take and pass the bear identification test, and you also have to print the certificate and carry it with you along with your license. That test is only required for these listed units right here, but my personal opinion, it doesn't matter if you're hunting these units or not. I think it's a good idea to just take the test anyway, because I feel like it's good to, you know, just understand and know the differences between a black bear and a grizzly bear, because let's be honest, you never know when you might run into a grizzly bear. So with that being said, we move on to the next one. The reason why you need to take that bear identification test is because of this right here. Grizzly bears are protected under both federal and state law and may not be shot or killed. So it's your responsibility as the hunter to know exactly what you are looking at before you pull the trigger. And then here, there's just a diagram of basically the differences between a black bear and a grizzly bear. You can study that on your own. And then the last part, when it comes to bear hunting, if you are successful harvesting a bear, you must submit a tooth from the bear. And the tooth that you have to submit is right here. It's called the premolar tooth. So once you harvest the bear, you're gonna dig out the premolar tooth, and then you're gonna go to a WDFW office and you're gonna ask for a specific envelope. They're gonna hand you an envelope, you're gonna drop in your tooth, you're gonna seal that envelope, and then you're gonna send it over to basically the department. That right there is pretty much it when it comes to black bear hunting. So just to do a quick recap, August 1st through November 15th is basically the general fall season for bear in Washington statewide, with a few area restrictions. You could shoot up to 2 bears in the fall, as long as you have a tag for each bear you're shooting. Don't shoot sows with cubs. And then you need a bear identification test if you're hunting in select units. And then if you are successful harvesting a black bear, you have to submit the premolar tooth. And then there's a bunch of directions here that you can basically go and read on your own. So that's basically black bear hunting in Washington. It's a lot more simple than deer and elk. Last but not least, we're gonna move to cougar. And cougar, it's a little bit more complicated when it comes to regulations. So here we go. So if you look here, there's 2 different general seasons when it comes to mountain lion. The first one is the early hunting season, and the second one is the late hunting season. Early season occurs from September 1st through December 31st, and the late season occurs from January 1st through April 30th. The difference between early season and late season is that late season has a quota. Early season does not have a quota. And so the difference between a quota and a non-quota is basically this. So in early hunting season, from September 1st through December 31st, it doesn't matter how many cougars are being harvested. As long as you have a valid cougar license, you can go hunt a cougar from September 1st through December 31st. On the flip side, when you go into late season, which is January 1st through April 30th, there is now a quota set in that season. And so if you look on the right side of this page right here, you can see there's a harvest guideline with specific GMUs next to them, right? We'll take GMU 105, for example, right? So the harvest guideline is 4. That means that in the late season for GMU 105 specifically, there can only be 4 cougars harvested in that unit for the late season. So even though the late hunting season says it's gonna run from January 1st through April 30th, let's say hunters are able to harvest 4 mountain lions by January 5th. So January 5th, in GMU 105, 4 people were able to harvest a mountain lion. Since the harvest guideline is already met by January 5th, that means that season is closed from January 6th through April 30th because the quota has been met. Once a certain number of cougars are harvested during the late season, then those specific units close. So if you are hunting mountain lions in the late season, you have to be constantly aware of how many cougars have already been harvested in a specific unit, because again, if a specific quota has been met in a specific unit, that means you can no longer go and hunt mountain lion in that specific unit during the late hunting season. So if you look at this red font right here, this basically explains everything you have to do, right? So the first thing, like I was just trying to explain, the late season, which starts January 1st, you must call the hotline to check up on the quotas, to get an up-to-date quota guideline. And then the second step is, again, referring to January 1st, All successful cougar hunters must report their harvest to the cougar hotline at this number right here within 72 hours. Third, it doesn't matter which hunting season you're hunting mountain lion in, you must present your cougar, the unfrozen hide and skull, to Fish and Game so that they can seal it, and you have to do this within 5 days of the kill, and you have to leave proof of sex attached to it. And then fourth, you must report your cougar hunting activity for both early and late hunting seasons and the wild systems. And so the other thing is just look at the bag limits. You can only shoot 1 cougar in Washington per year. Hunting methods, you can use any legal weapon. You can't use hounds in the state and whatnot. So that's basically how the general concept works when it comes to mountain lions in Washington. Again, we're back on the table of contents, and my advice after this video, even if you watched this video, I encourage you to go and literally just read through these topics. Now we're gonna move on to the next thing, and we're just gonna cover some of the highlight regulations that I feel are extremely important regarding rifle hunting here in Washington. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Hunter Orange and Hunter Pink on page 10. So here is page 10 at the bottom of page 10. This basically lists the requirements for Hunter Orange and or Hunter Pink. The only reason I'm disregarding this first one is because I'm focusing on big game. If you're hunting upland birds or rabbits, you want to pay attention to this. But again, we're talking about big game. So the second one says, it is unlawful to hunt big game except bear and cougar with modern firearm equipment at any time in any manner unless the hunter is wearing fluorescent hunter orange and or fluorescent hunter pink clothing. The next one says, it is unlawful to hunt wildlife except migratory birds during those times in those places open to taking of deer or elk during non-master hunter modern firearm general seasons unless the hunter is wearing fluorescent hunter orange and or fluorescent hunter pink clothing. Next, we're going to move on to where hunter orange is not required. The first bullet right here talks about upland game birds. We're going to skip that because we're talking about big game. Hunter orange is not required while hunting in a muzzleloading or archery only season and possessing a valid muzzleloading or archery deer or elk tag. Those right there are the regulations regarding hunter orange when it comes to big game. If you're anything like me, I just got confused reading that. To simplify things, okay, this is what is required when it comes to hunter orange and big game hunting. The only time you are required to wear hunter orange is when you are hunting. It doesn't matter what big game species you're hunting. The only time hunter orange is required is when you are hunting in an area or a unit that is open to rifle deer or rifle elk season. Outside of the rifle seasons for deer and elk, you are not required to wear hunter orange. To make things simple, this is basically it. So if you look up here, it literally states this in a much more simple manner. Hunter orange and hunter pink is required for anyone hunting in an area open to modern firearm general deer or elk seasons. Now, here's my advice. It might not be required outside of modern firearm general deer and elk seasons, but it is always recommended. So if you're unsure of the regulations, just wear hunter orange. And the regulations regarding hunter orange is you need at least 400 square inches of hunter orange on your body that is visible on all sides. If you guys watched my videos in the past, when I'm hunting in an area where I am legally required to wear hunter orange, I've got a blaze orange hat, I've got a blaze orange beanie, I got my vest, and even on my backpack, I got a little orange flap on the back, just because the more orange you have, the more you're going to be visible to other hunters in the area. So with that being said, there's a lot of topics here still that I didn't cover. But again, my point I'm trying to make in this video is I'm just trying to outline some of the things so that you have a better understanding of how you can approach your own research when it comes to hunting Washington. It's your responsibility to go through and read and understand all of this. Hopefully that gives you a much better understanding of how Washington works. Now, to end out this video, I'm going to hop on onX Maps and I'm going to give you guys some basic tips of how you can dissect the state, and so that you can pick a spot of where you want to go hunting. Before you even start looking into what animal you want to hunt or what specific unit you want to hunt, just take a moment and just dissect Washington as it is. Because when you just look at Washington right here, there's a wide variety of terrain in Washington, right? Like if you look at like the central and like the southeast parts of Washington, it's very yellow, it's very dry. You go up here into northeast Washington, it's a little bit more woodsy, a little bit more forested. And then you go more west, up here you got high country. All these white stuff, that's snow, because snow, depending on the year, it lives on those mountains year round. And so you get into the high country of the Cascades, and then you come down here, you go into like the St. Helens area. And then the more you move west, you know, you approach the ocean, you get more into like that western Washington terrain. And then down here, like southeast Washington, you have a little bit of the top of the Blue Mountains. And so if you just look at this, you've got like 3 main different mountain ranges, right? Like you got the Selkirk Mountains up here in northeast Washington, you got the Cascades right here, you got part of the Blue Mountains down here, and then down here you got a lot of just more open country, whatnot. And then here by Moses Lake, you got a lot of agriculture and whatnot. And then you go onto the coast, this gets into like all the thick and wet and nasty country. And then obviously there's logging country and whatnot all around here. And so that's the first thing that we're gonna do, is we just simply dissected Washington as Washington. We're not even breaking it up into GMUs or anything. We just looked at the terrain that Washington has to offer, and we're just taking it for that as of right now. The significance of this is because different terrains tend to have different species of animals living on there. And on top of that, sometimes people, they want to hunt in certain terrain, right? So if you want to hunt like desert type of terrain, why are you going to go to northeast Washington where it's all forested? Vice versa, right? If you want to hunt high country, high alpine stuff, the Cascade Mountains is where you're going to go. You're not going to go hunt an alpine mule deer by Moses Lake where it's flat. That's the point of my first step here, is to just observe Washington as a whole. After we've done that, we're going to go into the map layers. So top left corner up here, press on map layers. We're going to go into our layer library. And right here, I'm already at Washington. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn on Washington hunt units. So we're going to press the plus, and it's going to give you a sign that was added. So as soon as you press that, now Washington is being divided into game management units. And again, as I said earlier in the video, remember this, GMUs that start with a 1, 2, and 3 are Eastern Washington units. The ones that start with 4, 5, and 6, those are Western Washington units. So let me give you guys an example of that. So if we just zoomed in towards like the Wenatchee Mountains, right? If you look right here, 336, guess what? It starts with the number 3. So this is an Eastern Washington unit. If we go to the next unit, the bordering unit to the west, it starts with a 4. And guess what? That's a Western unit. So 346, Eastern unit. 356, Eastern unit. 364, Eastern unit. 513, Western unit. 653, Western unit. 460, Western unit. And so once you have your map layer turned on, you can see there's a bunch of numbers here. And not every single unit is going to be open for what you want to hunt, right? For example, like if you go to like unit 121, you're not going to find a black-tailed deer there, okay? You're just not. Vice versa, you go to like 648, you're probably not going to find a mule deer over there. This is where you can start dissecting the state because of what you want to do, right? Now, if you say, okay, I understand the diversity of Washington, I want to hunt mule deer. If you want to hunt mule deer, well, here's your spots. You have the Cascade Mountains that you can hunt mule deer. You could go down to the Blue Mountains and hunt mule deer there, or you can go up into northeast Washington, find mule deer there, or you can go into central Washington and find mule deer there instead, right? Vice versa, if you want to find like whitetails, maybe northeast Washington or maybe southeast Washington or somewhere along central Washington here. Vice versa, if you want to hunt Roosevelt elk, well, you're going to hunt basically over here, like this entire side of Washington over here. You're going to hunt Roosevelt elk on this side. You're not going to find Roosevelt elk down by Lewiston, Idaho, right? So that's the idea that I'm trying to get to you guys. It's like, understand the diversity of Washington and where these animals are. Here's all I'm going to say. So to get black bear and cougar out of the way, you can find black bear and cougars pretty much throughout the state. The only places you probably won't really find either is like down in this area right here, like Moses Lake area, because it's just not really black bear habitat. And maybe you'll run into the occasional cougar, but it's not all that high in terms of black bear and mountain lion population. Yes, you might find a couple here and there, but overall it's not as abundant elsewhere. That's basically it for black bear and cougar. Very fast, very simple. We're gonna move on to deer, and specifically deer for this segment right here. So here's a very rough outline of where you will find certain species of deer. So we all know it. West side of Washington, basically, I would estimate like west of the Cascade Mountains where you see all this white stuff like around here. I would say all this right here, west of this magical line right here, is where you would find a black-tailed deer. So the thing you have to understand is you will find mule deer pretty much all over eastern Washington. You just will. That's just where they live. You can find them up high in the Cascade Mountains. You can find them down here by the Blue Mountains. You can find them throughout the flat agriculture lands of central Washington. And you can find them through the outskirts of the Selkirk Mountains in northeast Washington. Mule deer are just very abundant in that way. Whitetails, they have a very healthy population up in northeast Washington. And then the more you travel west, the whitetail population slowly gets a little bit less, but you can still find a relatively good whitetail population. So a lot of times in these areas up here, like where I'm circling right now, like you will find a mix between whitetail and mule deer. It really just depends. Although when you really dissect into the specific terrain and habitat of each, there are some spots where you will find more whitetail and there are some other spots where you'll find more mule deer. It's just a matter of what specific terrain that area looks like. So mule deer, you can find them pretty much throughout eastern Washington. And I can say the same thing with whitetail too. You can find whitetail pretty much throughout eastern Washington too. Again, it's just that there are some areas where whitetails are more heavily populated and there are some areas where the mule deer are more heavily populated. Now you can start diving into specific units, because if you wanted to find a whitetail and you know they're in this region, then look at what it narrows down your units to, right? So if you want to find a whitetail, here's the units that you need to be focusing on. Vice versa, for mule deer, if you want to find mule deer, well, here's the units you want to be focusing on. For blacktail, here's the units you want to be focusing on, right? So now that you understand how onX Maps comes into play when I'm e-scouting, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into onX Maps, and now I'm going to give you guys some like strictly e-scouting tips. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go back to map layer, and we're going to go to layer library, and we're going to go way back down to Washington. And all this stuff right here, I encourage you to turn on, because right now we have no idea what is private property and what is public property, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on private lands right here, press on it. We're going to turn on Washington government lands. We're going to turn on Washington possible access. And we're going to turn on Washington private lands hunting. Once you have all that, we're going to go back to map layers. We're going to open Washington. So these are all the layers that you have active right now. So now that you have both the private and public land layers activated, if we zoom in really close to a specific unit, like GMU 121 right here, for example, you can see how it is outlined as to what property belongs to who. So for example, this yellow shaded area right here is owned by who? Right here, BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, and BLM is public land, so you can legally hunt here. So this layer right here tells you where you can hunt. If you have the private land turned on, if you go a little bit to the west, if you look at all this right here, look at all these names. All these names are the people who owns that property. And majority of the time, if it's a name that pops out, that is private property. You are not legally allowed to hunt there. And so if you just look at this map right here, it will show you where you can hunt and where you cannot hunt. That is a very powerful tool coming from onX Hunt. So that right there is a pretty big reason why I use onX Hunt. Is I just want to know what's public land, what's private land, where I can hunt and where I cannot hunt. As I will show you right here, the reason why it is so important, because there's actually a lot of units in Washington where the vast majority of that unit is just private property. So if we go down to unit 136, right, like right outside of Cheney, if you just look at this map, these blue and yellow blocks right here, these are basically public land. But if you look at all these other spots where it's not highlighted in blue and yellow, that's just all private land. So if somebody says, I want to go hunt unit 136 and you don't have permission to hunt private land, look how limited you are to areas you can hunt. There's not a lot of areas you can hunt in unit 136. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't shoot a deer in unit 136 on these small pieces of public land. The point I'm just trying to make is when you're doing your research on a specific unit, these are sometimes the issues you're going to run into. Is some units just don't have a vast plot of public land for you to hunt on. A lot of it might be private land, a lot of it might be public land. So the next question that people are going to ask me is like, okay, so what is public land that I can hunt and what is land that I cannot hunt? So we'll touch on public land first. So there's two types. There's federal land and there's state land. So the most common type of federal land, public land that you can hunt would be national forest. And how it's broken up is there's a couple different national forests throughout Washington. For example, there's Okanagan National Forest, there's Colville National Forest, and so on and so on. So as long as it has national forest, then you know that it's public land and you, the public, are free to go hunt on it. On the other hand, you have like state property. You literally have like state land where it's literally called Washington State Land. And you also have like Department of Natural Resources. Those are also public land that you can access. Although for state land, I believe you're required to buy this thing called the Discovery Pass, which is like $30 to go hunt on that property. So that's just a general idea of what's open to the public. Of course, there are some specific areas within those pieces of public property that might be close to hunting because of a certain exception. So always keep an eye out on that. But for the most part, national forest, BLM, state land, state forest, those are all public land that you can all go and hunt. The other thing I want to talk about is public access. And this is probably one of the more underlooked pieces of land that a lot of people can actually hunt. So if we go back to map layers, again, we turn on this layer called Washington Possible Access. And this is actually privately owned property, but the company that owns that parcel of land actually allows for the public to go hunt. So for the public, you can essentially treat it like public land. It's just that it's owned by a different entity, right? So again, Washington Department of Natural Resource, that is state owned, and you can essentially treat this as public land. But if you look alongside this property right here, there are some of these blocks of property that have a bunch of green dots in them. And if it has a green dot in them, then that means that there is a possibility for the public to hunt those lands. So for example, right here next to this Washington Department of Natural Resource, you can see it says Inland Empire Paper Company. So this piece of property right here is not owned by the state or the government. This is owned by a company called Inland Empire Paper Company. So it's a privately owned parcel of property. However, they do allow the public to access. Now, depending on the entity that owns that piece of parcel, sometimes there are certain exceptions as to how you can enter that piece of parcel. For example, Inland Empire Paper Company, in order for you to publicly access this piece of property right here, you actually have to pay for a yearly permit. And once you buy that permit, then you can essentially treat Inland Empire Paper just like public land. You can just, as long as you have that permit with you, you can go hunt it. Now, there's a lot of different companies that own various parcels of land that you can go hunt on, and not every one of them has the same rules and regulations. So some of them might be free. Some of them, like IEP or Inland Empire, might charge you a little fee, or there are some big companies that actually charge you quite a bit of a hefty fee. All these possible access properties are just more potential areas for you to go hunt on top of like the state land, national forest, state forest, BLM, and so on. So this is just essentially more opportunities that I'm presenting to you in this video. So if you come across a specific property, right, and you do a little research on the name and you can't find any information regarding hunting access to it, just give the district biologist to call, because a lot of time the district biologist will have an answer for you whether or not you can hunt that land or how you can hunt that land. The next thing would be to literally like pick out a spot. We're gonna zoom in to the Cougars Indian Reservation. That way I don't burn anybody's spots. So the Cougars Indian Reservation is pretty much not open to the public. You have to be part of the tribe to hunt. So I'm gonna go into the Cougars Indian Reservation to give my example of how one would go on about finding the animal. I don't care what species of animal you're hunting: elk, mule deer, black-tailed deer, white-tailed deer, cougar, whatever. There are 3 things that every single animal needs, and that is this: they need food, they need water, and they need shelter. That's it. 3 things that you have to look for on the map. So let me give you context to the example that I'm going to give here. So let's say that I want to hunt white-tailed deer in this one unit. I looked at the regulations. There is a rifle season for whitetail in this unit, and you know, the legal animal is any buck. Okay, let's say that's the regulations for this example. How I would go on about if this was the general area I picked within that unit. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to come down to the bottom. I'm going to turn on topo, the topography layer. Because when you turn on the topography layer, you can see all of the creeks a lot better than if you were on satellite or hybrid mode. So we zoomed into a little piece, and the first thing I always look for is water. Everything needs water, okay? So how Onyx has done this is pretty simple. So all these dashed blue lines are water, and this solid line at the bottom is also water. But the difference is this solid blue line stands for a creek or a stream that is always running year round. That's the solid line. So if it's a solid blue line like this one, that means the creek is always running. It's never dried out. These dashed blue lines means that it's a seasonal stream or a seasonal creek. So this drains into the main creek, and so depending on how wet of a year you got from snow or rain, this water source right here may or may not be there when you go hunt. So like this year, 2021, it's an extremely dry year. So I can imagine that all these temporary or all these seasonal creeks right here probably don't have water. So that means that in order for animals to get water, they have to come drink down by this creek. As long as we know that there's water in the area, that's all I care about. So we know there's water in the area. So I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna turn on hybrid mode. We can't see it anymore, but from the topo layer, we know that there's a creek down here that runs year round, which is, in this case, is called Bridge Creek. So we know that there's a water source in the area, which is good because everything needs water. So we got water checked out of the way. Now, all these open hillsides right here, since there are no trees blocking it, that means these hillsides get a lot of sunlight. And when plants get sunlight, guess what? They grow, right? So all these hillsides right here, we can assume that there's just a lot of feed and vegetation for herbivores, like deer in this case, right? We're chasing white-tailed deer. So we can mark these areas, these open areas, as potential feeding areas for white-tailed deer. So I'm gonna come over here to this right-hand corner, and I'm gonna drop a pin. So I just press that pin button. It's gonna pop out a little pin, and I'm just gonna drag it to here. I'm just gonna drag it there, and then I'm just gonna literally name this feeding area. So we're just gonna save it. So there we go. We have a potential feeding area. You can literally put this up here as well. So we're gonna put feeding area 2 right here. And we're just gonna drop a third one right up here. We're gonna call this feeding area 3. Okay. So right off the bat, we checked off water and we checked off potential feeding areas. So we know there's water, we know there's food. The only thing that's missing is where are these animals going to go bed when they need to go sleep? Well, that's what all this timber area is. Animals like to go sleep in the timber because, well, they're just hidden. They're not right in the open where all the predators are gonna see them. So we know that all these timbered areas are potentials for animals to go bed. And honestly, they can bed anywhere in there if you want. So all we're gonna do is we're just gonna drop a pin right over here. And we're gonna color code it so we know. So we're just gonna say potential bedding. Right off the bat, we've already checked all three things. We have a water source right down here. We have potential feeding area here, right here, and up here. And then third, we have potential bedding areas all around here. And this is like a perfect zone because they don't have to travel far to go from bedding to feeding to water and back to feeding. Like everything's in a relatively close proximity, which is good. And I know that elk and deer, like they can travel miles to go from place to place, but when you can find an area that is in relatively close proximity like this, you're in a pretty good zone, right? So even though we're focusing on white-tailed deer in this example, this is pretty much true for elk and bears as well, right? Like open areas, that's where you would find huckleberries for bears, and then timber areas is where bears would go to sleep. And then of course, everything drinks out of the creek. And then for deer and elk, they're both herbivores, so they kind of behave the same way. They feed off of the same hillsides, they might bed in the same areas, and they drink from the same water source because that's just water. Now that we have this laid out, we're gonna go and turn this into 3D. So if you go to the bottom right corner and you press on this little button right here, you can see we are currently on the 2D map. All we're gonna do is we're gonna press on 3D, and this is gonna go into 3D mode. So now that we have this in 3D, you can navigate and toggle the map around, but I'm gonna let it sit here for now. So here's our little bedding area marker that we dropped, and these two red markers are potential feeding areas, and then we have our creek running down in this little valley. The power of having 3D is it really puts into perspective of what you're gonna get when you actually step foot into that area. Because on 2D maps, a certain hillside might look really good from a potential vantage point, but when you turn it into 3D mode, you might learn that you can't even see that hillside from that potential vantage point because there's something blocking in the way, right? But for example, if we were to get onto this little knob right here, we can glass all of this, which is prime because we know that at first light and last light, deer are probably going to be feeding out in this opening, so we want to be able to glass to this hillside. They might be coming out of this timber patch from bedding to go feed here, or they might be coming out of here to go feed down here or up here. So when it comes to beginner e-scouting, that is literally it right there. Don't overcomplicate things. Find where a potential water source is, find potential bedding areas, and find potential feeding areas. That's it. Don't overcomplicate things. This is the foundation to my e-scouting. I just look for water sources, I just look for bedding areas, and I just look for feeding areas. After that, it is my boots on the ground and actually walking through it, and then that's when I look for specific things, like maybe I want to find an elk wallow, or maybe I want to find like a hidden spring that might not be on Onyx maps. That's basically it. Do not overcomplicate e-scouting, especially if you are a beginner. I just want to re-emphasize this. I didn't cover a lot of stuff, and I didn't cover every single little regulation. It is your responsibility to go and familiarize yourself with the Washington Hunting Regulation pamphlet and learn the rules and regulations regarding it. The table of contents will help guide you through everything you need to know. This was more of just trying to help you get your foot on the ground so that you can start hunting. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, leave a comment down below. Until then, thank you guys so much for watching, and good luck this fall.